This video has been funded by Loans by Vicky, the best loan officer around. If you've been interested in buying a home, Vicky's the right pick for you. She makes things easy and communication is effortless. With access to dozens of lenders, it's no surprise that she has the best rates we've seen. Loans by Vicky, the smoothest option to getting settled into the home of your dreams.
Today we're talking about dating formulas. What kind of dating formulas have you heard of? Which ones have you subscribed to? Which ones have you thrown out? We just want to talk about those dating formulas and what to do with them. You can adopt which rules make sense to you as rules of thumb. You can take them as guidance and use the wisdom in them. However, we recommend against taking them as gospel truth or strict adherence to them.
There seem to be a lot of so-called dating experts that have secret formulas or magic formulas about how to do dating and relationships properly. What do you think of that, Cathy?
Well, what's interesting, Jeff, is that some people think we're dating experts because we wrote the book Intentional Courtship.
Right.
But in the book, there's zero formulas.
Sometimes a formula is just simply ill-suited to your situation. They can foreclose things that the Holy Spirit may tell you. So in terms of grieving, we've heard you need to grieve for half the years you were married after a death or divorce.
You know, I just had a coaching client tell me that if she were to grieve for half the year she was married, which was, I guess, 28 years,
Yeah.
that if she grieved the loss of her marriage for 14 years, she wouldn't start dating or even considering a relationship until she was more than 60 years old.
Right, and think about it. Who wants to grieve for 14 years? My former wife and I actually used to talk about this thing called the Queen Victoria syndrome, which is you can grieve for as long as you can afford to. And Queen Victoria, of course, grieved for 40 years because she was the wealthiest woman in the world. She could afford to grieve that long. Now, I'm not suggesting you shouldn't grieve or there's something wrong or wimpy about grieving, not at all. What I'm against is the formula. It has to be 1 year after your divorce. Well, really? When do you measure this from? If you think about it, that 1 year, does it start running from the time you found out your spouse wanted a divorce, from the time you decided, from the day it was final? Like, where does that time run from? Because everybody at the moment their divorce is final is in a little different place in the grieving process. Why is 1 year a magic formula?
You know, Jeff, even if everybody was exactly the same point when they got divorced in terms of how they've processed the marriage and determined that it wasn't viable anymore and how long, you know, even if all those things were created equal, which it never is, what about the fact that people are different? That some people grieve longer because they're more sensitive? And what about the people who may be good at rolling with the punches of life and just kind of accepting things faster? You know, I mean, there's things that we're naturally gifted at and there's natural struggles. So that's another thing that is like completely all over the place in terms of how long each person needs is very individualized.
Right. So yeah, people are different. They're at different places in the grieving process. So while a year or 1 month for every year you were married, those may be kind of good rules of thumb. They could be good ideas, but cater it to your own situation, to your own temperament and personality, to your own feelings and thoughts, and you be the best judge of when you're ready to start dating again after a relationship loss. And that's going to be a very individual kind of thing. So some of these rules and formulas and ideas they're not bad, but I think we tend to look at them sometimes as a magic talisman. This is what the experts tell us. And the experts don't always know your specific situation. So another thing, you know, that I would just throw in there about formulas about how long you need to grieve, I had pretty well grieved my marriage by the time it ended. I would say, however, that I wasn't ready at that point to jump into another serious relationship. I dated casually and I let the women know that I was dating, that I wasn't ready for something serious yet. That could develop as time went, but I had some things I needed to do first in terms of just finances and getting my life together, being in a better place emotionally and spiritually and all of that. And you know, I had a great time dating during that period, and I was honest with the women that I dated about the situation that I was in.
I believe that you said it took 3 years for your divorce to go through?
Correct.
It took mine 3 months. So 3 months compared to 3 years, Again, that just demonstrates how different each situation can be. And for me, because it had only been 3 months and I did start dating right away, I wasn't ready for that. So the reason these rules exist is so that we don't hop into something when we're not emotionally capable of it, when we're not ready. But then we can also spend our entire lives getting ready. Like Jeff mentioned, if you have the financial resources, you could grieve for decades. But who wants to do that? Because it's not just money, it's time. Do we want to spend that much of our lives grieving?
Miserable.
Exactly. You know, Jeff, there's one that I've always liked, but again, I think it's got to be a rule of thumb rather than like a rule.
Right.
Is 1 month for every year of the marriage.
Even that rule of thumb, Kathy, I think it's a good one, like you say, but again, where does the clock start running? I think it starts running when you have accepted, okay, the divorce is happening. You know, whether that divorce was your choice or your spouse's choice. And then, again, people are individual. 1 month for every year of the marriage may not be enough for some people, and it may be way too long for others.
But I think it's within reason of not taking too long, but taking enough time to heal from however long the marriage was. Now, for me, that would have been 14 months. That would have been just over a year from the time that I accepted the marriage was over. And that acceptance was more like kicking and screaming.
Yeah.
And I want to point out here that whether you're rejected and it was not your choice, and there's a certain level of deep sadness in that, or you made the choice and it was a tough choice based on really bad circumstances and there was no good choices, there's a lot of grief in that too. So I just want to give a shout out to those who have to make that hard decision, that it's not fair sometimes that the rap it gets for, well, if you chose it, then you can't be sad about it. No, I think you absolutely can. And again, just a rule of thumb, 1 month for every year of marriage. Allow yourself some time to grieve once you've accepted that that marriage is over. That might be while the divorce is taking process. That might be during separation. It might be after the divorce is final. It's going to be different for everyone. But I do think that if in 8 months you feel like you've done all the work you need to do, you've gone to counseling, you've gotten a good coach, you've done the things that you need to do for your own mental health and well-being, and you feel like you're in a good place, I don't think you have to wait 3 more months because it's the rule.
You know, Kathy, there's a friend of ours in our group, our Love in Later Years group, who lost her husband. And interestingly, I had known her husband. He was a friend of mine. We both ran for political office in the same small county in Washington at the same time. And I knew him and he was a friend. Well, this particular woman lost him unexpectedly to COVID. And he was a good guy, and I could tell when she first talked to me about the situation that she was in some pretty deep pain over it. And this was a husband that she'd been married to for 30 years, plus or minus. And she did have a lot of pain over it, and I just noticed that she posted something on social media about how it was the 2-year anniversary of her former husband's death. She remarried a few months ago. Now, I don't feel like it's anybody else's place to judge, and I certainly wouldn't, whether she hurried too fast after losing her husband to find another companion. I think that's a very personal decision. That's one of the things we want you to be very careful to guard against, is judgment of another person's grief process and whether or not they're following the right rules to move through it.
One factor that I believe is even more important than time is intentional effort. Because when it comes to healing and grieving, we can take years to make very little progress, maybe even go in the opposite direction. With a negative mindset, we can actually do ourselves more harm and more damage than how we started out. We can get into all sorts of dirty pain about what we've lost. And it can be a really dark place that we go to, and it's really hard to get out of. But if we are wise and we make sure that we do the work, we read the books, we seek for guidance and we ask for help, when we do those things, we're going to come out on the other side of grief a lot healthier and a lot more ready to move on with our lives in a lot shorter period of time. So that's another reason I don't really like any of these rules, other than just to allow some time.
Right. You know, I want to say one more thing about grief, and that is there are some losses that you just never get over. Now, the friend that we talked about who lost her husband to death, do you think she's over it? Do you think someday she'll get over it? I don't think so. I think she'll always think of that loss as something very deep and very personal. That doesn't mean she can't move ahead, meet someone else, have that relationship stand on its own 2 feet, and love her new husband as well. I am sure she does. And to be very personal, I have a little brother who I lost to cancer back in 1993 when he was only 17 years old. That was a very difficult loss. Now, he's been gone quite a bit longer than he was here. And I still can be thinking about him or talking about him and get a lump in my throat. Does that mean I haven't grieved enough? No, it's just part of life. You get used to it. You don't really get over it. Also very personal, within a few days of recording this episode, I lost a son in a climbing accident. And I've thought about that. And you know what, friends? I'm never going to get over it. I don't even want to get over it. Now, I know that I will come to a place eventually where I'm not thinking about him every minute. I will come to a place where I can be happy and remember him and think of him without pain. But there'll always be those moments when I talk about him or think of him in a certain way when that's going to hurt. And I think some losses, whether it is your primary relationship with your spouse or another loved one, where that grief is always going to be there. And if you wait until you just never feel sad about that anymore, ever, you might wait forever.
You know, President Nelson has said, the only way to take the sorrow out of death is to take the love out of life.
Sometimes we say you can't take the sorrow out of divorce without taking the love out of marriage. So very similar kind of feeling.
Yeah, and my new thoughts since we received this devastating news of Jeff's son's passing is that when we experience the loss of death or divorce, we sorrow because we choose love.
Absolutely. And there are those times, most of the last few days, it's hard for me to go an hour without bursting into tears. It won't be like that forever. I know it won't. But it'll always be that way once in a while. And when you really love somebody and that is taken from you, whether by death or divorce, you're gonna feel it. And you might feel it for the rest of your life. And that doesn't mean that you can't move on and build a happy life and be happy most of the time. And I found that after losing my little brother.
And perspectives over time change from the feelings of it's not supposed to be this way to gratitude for the good you did experience and the lessons you've learned from it.
On a lighter note, there are a lot of rules people create for dating. One of my favorites is 3 dates before you kiss. Now, I don't see that carved with the finger of God on the stone tablets. That is just a rule somebody made up to say we need to take kissing seriously. So take it seriously, but some people don't feel like they're ready for physical affection after 3 dates. Some other people, on the first or second date, they've gotten to know the other person a little bit even before they started dating. Maybe they kiss on the first or second date. And, some people will wait until they've dated for 6 months. We actually know a couple that's engaged right now who was just friends for 6 months before they ever kissed. And so we don't think that a specific rule about how many dates you should go on and then the formula is to kiss at that point. That's kind of ridiculous.
And Jeff, if this rule was etched with the finger of God in stone, we would be in big trouble.
Yes, that's true.
We've kissed on our first date.
That's right.
we had like the most epic phone conversation ever. So when we got together for our first date, we already knew each other pretty well.
Yep, and I wanted to kiss her. I look at this face. How could you not? Cathy, a lot of these formulaic rules that I hear come from that book, which I like. How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk. Of course, it assumes the other person was the jerk and I was just fine. But tell me about some of those rules.
Well, Mr. John Van Epp had, I believe, a 3-month holding period. One of my clients calls it 90 days same as cash. And so she's decided that at least 90 days getting to know someone before getting physical, because she doesn't want those rose-colored glasses to go on. And, but there's some complications in that situation that she's finding herself in. And we talked a little bit about this idea of, do I hold on to this rule or do I get rid of it? And so what we did is we talked about the reasons behind the rule, the wisdom in the advice, which I know there's the RAM model, and I tried using that when I was dating. It was hard, but I tried to, which is basically that you want to know and trust and commit in higher amounts before you get physical, and the physical follows. And in healthy relationships, that's the general rule of thumb, and I do think there's a lot of wisdom in that. But I think if you get to the point where both of you want to commit, and kissing is for commitment in your world, like if that's important to you, but it's before the 3-month mark and it makes sense and it feels right to do it, then, it doesn't have to be exactly a certain amount of time.
Right. And I mean, if you think about this, let's suppose that I start dating someone, I go on a first date, and then I don't call her for a month. And then we go out again. And then I'm out of town for another month. And so I call her the third time. So I've dated her 3 times in 3 months. Is that the same as going out with someone every weekend for 3 months? Well, of course not. I mean, it's a ridiculous question. So Mr. John Van Epp does not know your personal situation. He can give you a good rule of thumb, but he can't tell you what is the rule you need to live by in every specific circumstance.
Right, and that's why I like his RAM model, actually, because it gives you the understanding behind the rule, which is let the physical follow all the getting to know and trust and commitment that comes first, and that leads to healthy relationship dynamics.
Right. Another one I heard a lot is if you're dating too soon after divorce, it means that you're in a rebound relationship. Of course, that depends on where you are psychologically and when you gave up and started grieving, as we've talked about before. So a rebound relationship means that you're in a space where you need a relationship to feel good inside. And so you lose a relationship either through death or divorce, and you're in a hurry to find someone new to fill that spot. And it isn't about the other person, it isn't about what you're trying to build, it's just, I gotta have somebody. Okay, that's what a rebound relationship is. Now, as we've talked about, many people are at different places in grieving, and you need to look inwardly as to, if your divorce took 3 years to finalize like mine, that's gonna be different than if it took 3 weeks. And, everybody's situation is gonna be different.
And mine took 3 months. And I ended up in a rebound relationship.
With ours, we were even considering divorce for a couple of years before we filed. So this was like a 5-year process.
Yeah, and that's a lot different than my situation where I was clearly codependent and needed to be in that next relationship, which doesn't usually work out well.
Yeah, so if you hear the advice, hey, if you're jumping right in on dating as soon as your divorce is final, you're in a rebound relationship, maybe you are, maybe not. Depends on the situation. So look hard at it yourself and make a decision as to whether that's really what you're doing.
So when it comes to marriage, there's some rules around age difference. So let's talk about some of those rules.
Yeah, some people talk about half your age plus 7. All right, who carved that one on stone tablets? Does that rule of thumb make sense regardless of the age of the two people? Okay, so when Cathy and I got married, even though we're 11 years and 11 months separated in age, half your age plus 7 would have worked out as our formula. It would have fit within that. But what about an 80-year-old? Is an 80-year-old and a 47-year-old going to make a good match? That's half your age plus 7. Now, I'm not going to say that in every case, a 47-year-old marrying an 80-year-old doesn't make sense. Maybe they really love each other and they've known each other a long time and they don't care about the age difference. If they want to do that, fine. On the whole, a 33-year age difference is a pretty big one. And so I'm just saying that to illustrate that half your age plus 7, it might work in your middle years and even in your late 20s. Does it work for much younger or much older people? I think that's highly debatable. And so I think it's not a bad rule of thumb. It takes a lot of things into account. You can sort of calculate that with your dating partners.
Out of all the formulas, I think I like this one better than some.
Right. So anyway, take that formula for what it's worth, look at it, and see if it fits your desires, your situation, your own sense of what you're looking for as you date and look for a serious relationship.
Well, and for the most part, if two people are happy together, why does it really matter all that much what their ages are, unless it's extreme?
Right. Another one that's similar, and I won't delve deep into it because all of the same thinking applies as the previous one we just discussed, but within 10 years of your age is one I hear a lot. And you know, if I had applied that one, Cathy and I would not be together because I'm more than 10 years older than she is, a little bit more.
And that would have been a shame.
Yeah, that would have been a shame because we got a great thing going here.
Yeah, and I would say the only time it's ever even noticed is when we're talking about the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, and
Right.
we were at different stages of life during those eras.
I came home every day after school to Gilligan's Island and the Brady Bunch, and she hardly knows what those are. So there's a few little things like that. But really, in our day-to-day life, it doesn't affect us even a little.
You know, here's one that I've heard, and I actually do like it: 4 seasons in a road trip.
Right.
Yeah, so you need to date at least that long before deciding on marriage. Now, we needed 8 seasons and an intercontinental plane trip.
Right. And that involved a year in between of not dating each other. We were just pals. So I think, again, 4 seasons in a road trip is a great rule of thumb. But if the right person appears at the right time and you have an opportunity to move forward and the Holy Spirit confirms that with you, are you going to say, sorry, God, Mr. John Van Epp tells me 4 seasons in a road trip and I haven't gone that? Now, actually, Mr. John Van Epp doesn't say that. He says 2 years. But a lot of Latter-day Saints that are waiting until after marriage to have sex have modified his rule to say, well, for Latter-day Saints, it's 4 seasons and a road trip. We actually waited the 2 years, not intentionally, but because that was just how it worked out. And we had an international plane trip together for a couple of weeks, visited Qatar, visited Ethiopia. It was amazing. And we loved being together all that time, 24/7. So that did help us to cement our belief that we could make it together. And, you know, by the time we got married, we had known each other for quite a while. So we like that rule of thumb, but again, it isn't, you know, written by God on tablets of stone. It is a guideline to give you a sense of, okay, how well do you need to know somebody before you can make a commitment?
Well, and if you don't have 4 seasons, if there's some reason, maybe you have a long distance relationship and one of you has to move to be by the other to date, and that's a big commitment, more than a standard dating commitment. And
Right.
So maybe you could take a trip so that you can get to know them better 24/7, so that you can make that bigger decision sooner in the relationship rather than later. You know, my grandma reached out to me recently because she follows our videos and our podcasts and our articles.
She's like 86 years old, so she's been around a while.
She's been a single adult for a good portion of her adult years. Recently, my grandma, just out of the blue, sent me an email with a journal entry as she was going over her personal history that she ran across from her days dating as a single woman. Here's the quote: "As I think of my life, mistakes and everything, the one thing I would say about dating is to do it long enough to know how you relate to one another. Have the same boundaries and interests. So many can put on a good show while dating and then change after marriage. A few times I had the opportunity to go on vacation with men I was dating. Boy, that opened my eyes, and I did not continue dating them. Actually, I haven't dated since. You cannot change a person. What you see is what you get, unless they change themselves. A person needs to live well by themselves before they can live with someone else. One nice thing about dating in later years is that they are seasoned and you can see what they have become. Get involved in what you enjoy doing and you meet someone with the same interest."
You know, Cathy, when I think about your grandmother's advice, a couple of things occur to me. And one is that you don't want exclusively, you know, dating with candlelights and flowers. and you don't want exclusively the humdrum. Now, I had 4 seasons in a road trip when I married my second wife, but a lot of our dating was on these really fun weekend trips that we would plan together. We lived 6 hours apart, and so sometimes I actually flew across Texas to see her. But we went on these really great vacations, and they didn't necessarily give us a real sense of what it was going to be like to be married to each other. Reminds me of somebody else I heard give a fireside on how to avoid falling in love with a jerk, and he talked about the, what was the TV show?
The Bachelor.
The Bachelor, where one guy dates 30 girls, or The Bachelorette, where one girl dates 30 guys, and they gradually narrow it down to who they really want to get to know. And they take them to all of these romantic, exotic places, and the person giving this talk says, "I could fall in love with a turtle under those circumstances." He said, what they really should do is shut them in a room together and make them fold laundry for 10 hours. Of course, that wouldn't make good television, but it illustrates the point that, yeah, you need to go on a trip together. You need to be exposed to each other 24/7. You also need to be in each other's homes. You need to know each other's kids. You need to take the time of seeing somebody without her makeup on, or a guy when he's wearing the jeans that have blown out knees and he's reeking of body odor because he just came in from working in the yard. You need to see those sides of another person. And so I could do 4 seasons in a road trip by taking out a girl once every season, spring, summer, fall, and winter, and take a road trip with her and say, hey, I'm good to go. I'm following the rule. But that wouldn't be following the rule, would it? And so I think what we're trying to tell you is, yeah, you can look at 4 seasons in a road trip, and maybe if you're in each other's homes a fair amount and you get to see each other in lots of situations, but it's about really those things, being in each other's homes, being together for a long period without a break, like on a road trip, and also just having enough time to get to know the other person. That's the real principle. So I'm not saying forget the formula, but consider the reason behind it. The idea is you're getting to know somebody. That's an incredibly important endeavor, and there's not a formula that tells you when you've done that.
So who's the all-knowing they who created all these rules anyway?
Of course, Cathy, we can think of plenty of exceptions to these rules that have led to long-lasting and successful marriages. We know for ourselves that even following these rules didn't prevent divorce, because we've both been there. So what we want to talk to you about, what we want to leave you with is, look at these rules as sort of rules of thumb, as ideas about how to evaluate your situation. But none of them are a magic talisman that's going to keep you out of trouble. You still have to do the work. You still have to think things through with good reason and pay attention to your gut.
Thanks so much for watching this video. What rules have you attached to? Which ones do you relate with? Which rules have you thrown out? Please share your thoughts in the comments, and remember that any time is a great time for more love in your life.
Thank you for listening.